G'day guys, this is Stu here from Plan Manage Assist. Today, I've got with me today Dan from the Primitive OT. Dan, g'day, how you going?
Thank you, man. Thank you, Stu, for having us here on this podcast, and you're doing a really great initiative to get this out, get this information out there, and yeah, just thanks for having me on.
Mate, it's my absolute pleasure. And I think the reason I wanted to talk to yourself is because as the Primitive OT being something a little bit of a different type of support and service while still being an OT, I think we need to take a bit of a step back and actually acknowledge that there are some variances within the field of occupational therapy.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that because it is something that is obviously very pertinent to the Primitive OT. So tell me a bit more about what are primitive reflexes? What are they?
So to really understand what reflex integration is, it goes back to its core. What are primitive reflexes? These are involuntary movements and automatic movements that stems from our brain. So when a child is born, it's actually important for that infant's survival. There's a lot of sensory regulation that happens. There's a lot of motor processing that happens with regards to their development, and these are essentially vital for their survival. But in the same breath, they also fade away and they also integrate into your brain over time. So one with each other. It generally happens after a year of the child being born. And again, it's such a phenomenal area of information because primitive reflexes is in some ways considered to be a niche, but it's not a niche. It's fundamentals of a child being born.
I mean, it is, by the sounds of it, it's very much universal because every child's born with it.
You have them.
Exactly.
I have them.
Yeah. And you're right, having that underlying notion that it is a universal over being something that is necessarily taught or learned makes it a very good starting point for a lot of what you're talking about before.
For sure.
So Dan, so when it comes to those primitive reflexes, what happens if we don't integrate them? What happens there if there's just they get lost in what we're doing? So what happens if that's not happening there?
So that's where the challenges arise with when reflexes are unintegrated, can cause disturbances in these developmental delays, motor, sensory. In essence, it does affect their processing as they get older.
Yeah.
So essentially, we've seen how at the Primitive OT, we've seen how retained reflexes actually long-term affects their motor skills, their sensory regulation.
Yeah.
And, through an assessment with your OT and a list of questions, like interview style questions we ask the parent, we're able to actually understand which areas of their reflexes are retained or unintegrated. And through a certain set of exercises, we're able to integrate those reflexes. Somebody may come with challenges like focus or attention concerns, or the client, and specifically kids in this regard, may present with some physical challenges like poor posture or attention, focus at school, and it could be because of unintegrated reflex.
Okay. And so with the children that are coming through or the participants that are coming through, what are some, I know you talked about focus, but what are some of the key disabilities that you might be seeing that would benefit most from this type of work?
So we see a lot of kids with ADHD, Autism, and in such cases, reflex integration is the perfect method of therapy for these kids.
Okay.
But again, at the Primitive OT, we focus on traditional methods along with primitive reflex.
Oh, absolutely. Well. Yeah, it's not to replace one or the other. It is a complementary or supplementary sort of methodology that goes with what
exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
We could essentially all be trained in reflex integration. I've done extensive studying on reflex integration myself. However, again, with the OT, they have such an holistic mindset about when they're treating a patient, and in the NDIS itself, we understand that occupational therapy does follow a holistic approach. So they use even when it comes to their report, they use that entirely to understand the lifeline of the client on the NDIS. So in saying that, using primitive reflexes is just an area, obviously, we like to specialize in, but it doesn't replace traditional therapies. It's a add-on.
Yeah, it's that's supplementary. And so what I want to then look at then is the idea of how we go about doing that integration. So I'm guessing that's an element of that neuroplasticity that people potentially have, but it's they need to know how to shape their brains, how to do that rewrite process, because that's not something that can just be done by wishing it or thinking it. That does require that level of intervention, of thinking about it and actually consciously making those choices. So walk me through some of the stuff to do with neuroplasticity that your experiences with or that you're working with when it comes to this integration of reflex.
So neuroplasticity is even beyond primitive reflexes. Is just a phenomenal conversation to chat about, in that we have to constantly rewire our brains and open new neural pathways to learn things. So our brain is this beautiful piece of organ in our body that's controlling not just our bodies, but in the way we walk, the way we talk, the way we act. And again, why is it not back to the reflexes of our body? Or, and again, we have to be very careful that we don't make claims here, but it is that when you go to the gym, for example, it's a muscle. You have to train that muscle.
Yeah.
And in the same breath, we also train our brain to make our brain stronger. So that helps us reorganize those neural pathways within our brain. Beautiful topic to talk about.
Absolutely. And it would ultimately be its own thing in itself. We could talk about that all day, but just in the terms of the context of what we're talking about, the idea of that if you don't use it, you lose it mentality, I guess, is kind of where that sort of thinking lies, is that we're saying that, by doing those rewrites of the brain, by doing those exercises of the brain, that sort of then potentially has the ability to lead to something else. And so when it comes to the rewriting of the brain, what do those exercises look like? I know in the gym, if you want to work certain muscles, you use certain devices and certain machines to exercise those muscles. But I mean, other than doing Sudoku, how are we supposed to exercise the brain to do those different reflexes?
So that would depend on the reflexes that are unintegrated. Now, I'm not a trained occupational therapist, and I always recommend working with a person either trained in primitive reflex or integration or an occupational therapist, because they follow a set system of guidelines and assessments that determine your reflexes being unintegrated. So, and then obviously along with the therapy regimes and the exercise programs. However, we've developed a free ebook for your viewers. Whoever's listening is pretty interested in understanding what reflex integration are, what to look out for, and some exercises that are included in it. Please get in contact with Stu, and we'd love to send that out to you. And we're just that passionate about reflex integration. We believe that it could change the way people look at doing that.
Absolutely.
Therapy.
Well, look, what we'll do is we'll have the description below. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll have the link in the description. If you're listening via Spotify, just jump onto, do they go to your website, Dan, the Primitive OT?
Yeah.
And we'll get to their links at the end of the podcast as well. Dan, tell me about with the reflex integration and how that matches up to someone's overall health and well-being. How does that sort of connect there? So I know we talked about there being these universal reflexes. We talked about how they can sometimes be unintegrated. We've then talked about neuroplasticity in terms of integrating them. But how does that impact on overall health?
As we've just mentioned, we spoke about neuroplasticity. Everything starts at the brain. So basically, it works from sensory processing to emotional regulation. So again, everything starting at the brain. If we can identify which reflexes are integrated, we can actually go back to what's causing those disturbances in focus and attention. And then from your physical attributes, we can look at, your body posture. It also goes back into stabilizing your core muscles. And again, this is a very individual approach from client to client based on what reflexes are unintegrated. So we've got the physical, we've got workings on the brain, and really just bring it into a holistic form of treatment.
Absolutely. And it's really important as well that if you are looking at doing this sort of conversation with your support coordinator or having this sort of conversation with your existing OT, that you do take into account those individual circumstances for every participant and every person, regardless of whether you're on the NDIS or not, just to make sure that it's, one, that it is right for you, but two, that it's also how it's going to benefit and what the target approach is, because you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're leading to with this particular type of add-on sort of supplementary sort of technique, that it is that targeted approach on working towards whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, because every individual is going to have a different goal. Every disability comes with its own quirks and its own concerns. And I guess that, yeah, absolutely right, Dan, is that to make sure that they're having those initial conversations about what their end goal looks like, to then determine working that reverse engineering to say, hey, this is where it's going to sort of potentially have some value. Okay, so Dan, so in terms of what people can actually take away from this and what they can use, what would be something that you might like people who are listening or watching to be able to take away from this today?
So whether it's for you or whether it's for a family member or somebody you know could benefit from reflex integration, some of the things that you could potentially look out for is how they regulate their emotions, their sensory concerns like to touch, sound, and light. Of course, highly recommend, if you are feeling any concerns in these areas, contact a occupational therapist or a person who's trained in reflex integration. At the Primitive OT, we do offer assessments with our group of therapists who are trained in, or not only trained therapists, but also in reflex integration. And you can always reach out to us at the Primitive OT, and we would love to work with individuals who already understand the need for reflex integration. Really does half our job, because you entirely invested into the notion of reflex integration. But again, these are an area we're super passionate about, and with regards to that ebook that we have available, you can have a read, a little bit more information. There's some exercises available, and hopefully that'll get you started on your journey of reflex integration.
Fantastic. So once again, if you are watching this on YouTube, the link will be in the description below. If it's not and you're listening on Spotify or another audio broadcast sort of stream, you're welcome to reach out either through Plan Manager Assist or through us, or you can go straight to the Primitive OT through their socials at the Primitive OT. What's the website as well, Dan?
theprimitiveot.com.au, and you can drop us a message there with regards to a referral, or you just simply send us an email at info@theprimitiveot.com.au, and we'll be glad to assist or answer any questions that you may need.
Absolutely. And just so that people know, because theoretically, Dan, is that we've got people watching from Broome to Bundaberg, as well as where we are here in Sydney today. So where does the Primitive OT offer services at the moment?
So we're based in the Upper North Shore. However, we are 100% mobile service. So if you're in Sydney, we'll come out to you.
So yeah, Upper North Shore of Sydney. Sorry guys, if you're in the Upper North Shore of another region. But if you are in the Upper North Shore of Sydney, fantastic. You can absolutely go. And I know that you guys do travel quite a bit as well. Yeah. So if you're in that Sydney metro, or even go further north as well, where you've got those connections up there. So if that's in your territory and you want to know more, please feel free to reach out to Dan. Dan, thank you so much for coming on to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me.